You are part of STAR's Alpha Team, an elite unit in Raccoon City's police department, and you are sent to investigate some unusual murders in the outskirts, with Bravo Team missing after being deployed the day prior. You find Bravo Team's helicopter, along with their pilot, mutilated by some wild beast. Then, a pack of what looks like dogs attack Joseph. At least, they look like dogs, but they are decaying and, well, currently eating your squad mate. Everyone stares in shock and tries to shoot them, but bullets don't seem to be doing much. Breaking out of that state and faced with a seemingly headless horde of man eating what may at one point been dogs, the only way to make it out seems to be by running. Your escape route disappears as your pilot flees in the helicopter. And your only refuge is an abandoned mansion. In the scramble, one of your squad mates disappears, and you split up to search for them. In doing so, you find a man, no, something that used to be a man, feasting on a member of Bravo Team. The mansion is full of these, along with other creatures, and it seems to be much more behind it, and you must both survive the night until you are rescued and find out what's happening.
And it turned into a nightmare.
You enter the survival horror.
Resident Evil.
Those of you who have clicked on this may be asking, 1, who the hell are you? And 2, why are you talking about a 5-year-old remaster of an 18-year-old remake of a 24-year-old game that was spun off from a conceived remake of a 31-year-old game based on a movie? Well, I recently played the Steam version of the Resident Evil Remake as my first real foray into the series, and absolutely adored it. Like, laying in bed at night thinking about zombies, but not in the bad way or the gross way, adored it. And to that, I have to thank the countless gaming media personalities who have been singing the series' praises for years, as well as calling out its various missteps, but that has made the series feel somewhat impenetrable as well. 7 mainline games, 3 remakes that have massive overhauls, spin-offs that add to the story, spin-offs that maybe don't, I don't even know, and these movies which I'm guessing have nothing to do with the games, but I'm going to ignore them for now. And all of these vary widely in quality from the outside looking in. But the series' recent renaissance with Resident Evil 7, the 2 and 3 remakes, and upcoming 8, maybe a 4 remake, which will hopefully be good, pushed me to finally try the series out for myself. And I wanted to share my experience entering the survival horror, nearly as old as I am, and critique the game as its own beast. As I've mentioned before, many people have talked about this game, but many of those are viewing this game as part of a series and as a remake. But I'm only armed with knowledge from internet osmosis and short hours messing around with 4 and 5 at friends' houses as a younger person, so I am viewing Resident Evil as a singular experience, not as a remaster, remake, or a spiritual successor of sorts. And of course, I have terrible timing too, as I played a game about a viral outbreak in the midst of a viral outbreak, except this time the zombies aren't just old white people. Part 1. Tone. While I did just harp on about wanting to view Resident Evil Remake Remaster 2015 edition as its own experience divorced from the game it is remaking, it's hard not to draw a contrast between the previously talked about intro and the glorious 1996 FMV, as that and the voice acting in all its Velveeta veneered glory may be one of the most lasting aspects of the original game and is very much in the public consciousness. Whereas RE96 is very much reminiscent of cheesy low-budget B horror films, Remake's higher production values, more advanced technology, and refined direction lead to the overall tone being much darker, tenser, and stressful than the original. Especially in an age where jagged polygons and bad voice acting isn't the norm in mainstream games anymore. The visuals here were quite literally ahead of their time.
I think you'd better take a look at this.
Utilizing pre-rendered backgrounds with player, NPC, and object models overlaid on top, much like the original Resident Evil games and the PS1 Final Fantasies, which allowed much greater detail at the cost of limiting camera movement. The character models are great, and I think do a good job of both convincingly matching the voice acting and cutscenes and are animated well, so the game plays slow and deliberate, yet responsive enough to control. In the remastering process, the character models were updated and look in line with many more modern HD games, but the pre-rendered backgrounds did not take the transition as gracefully since they were not as simple to up-res, a problem that has plagued many games from the late 90s to the early 2000s. This leads to the backgrounds often appearing slightly jagged or pixely in places in 1080p on a modern monitor, since these backgrounds were simply not meant to appear in high definition and were most convincing, I'm sure, on a CRT in 4x3 and 480i or whatever the resolution is on the GameCube. Regardless, for me the backgrounds being not quite right added to the experience, weirdly enough. While the backgrounds in the PS1 Final Fantasies are dated but often add to the feeling of adventure, mysticism, and intrigue, seeing a proper HD model on some SD backgrounds really sells the feeling of something being terribly wrong in this mansion. When you and your squad enter the building, something immediately feels off, feeling that you are there but not quite in tune with your surroundings. The mansion and its connecting areas feel foreign, supernatural, and not quite of this reality. So I find the feeling to be fitting when it hits, and even then I found myself so invested and immersed in the game that I did not find it distracting. Similarly, the voice acting and writing, a far cry from the original, is generally pretty strong. It has some weird delivery and lines, much like my voiceover, I'm assuming due to its age and direction for a 2002 game. But overall, I found it convincing and generally well done. In fact, much like the backgrounds, the odd delivery adds to the feeling of the mansion not exactly being what it seems, even with all the zombies giving a pretty bad impression of the state of the estate anyways.
I guess we were right about this mansion being quite unnatural.
You have a way with understatements.
The acting exists in some uncanny valley, but in a good way. Somewhere in between good, completely straight dialogue and spray cheese B-movie affect is this game, where the immersion is not outright broken, but still allows some flexibility for moments of brief levity with dark implications hidden further within. Think making you question if a character is even human or a lizard person, instead of making you die laughing and sending a clip of it to all your friends. The rest of the audio design and music, though, is top-notch. The designers knew when to balance silent moments for tension, sound effects for action and scares, and some light music to relieve stress in safe spaces. Walking around, you only hear your own footsteps, and the old residence has become your nightmare settling. Your actions are shown to have consequences through sound, with a loud crack from your firearms filling them with a sense of purpose and scarcity, rather than a fact of life that you constantly engage with. Pushing objects sounds heavy and difficult. Doors creak, doorknobs screech, stairs squeak, branches rasp from windows, thunder pounds the building, and the denizens, oh they howl, groan, scream, shuffle, gurgle, and vomit. Then, as quick as these noises come, they disappear, leaving you alone with the sound of your footsteps and your thoughts. Music mostly only comes on when it's important, when there are zombies around the corner, puzzle to be solved, or when you make it to a place of brief refuge. Even then, the songs are largely low-key, and sometimes without clear melodies, leading to a sense of mystery and unease. When the music is more clear, it has a purpose, either in the few moments of action where a bit of bombast is allowed, or when the game allows you to ease your tension. A song that always comes to mind is a safe room theme, which masterfully balances a relaxing, repetitive melody to put you at ease like that warm flame of a lantern next to a typewriter in a place your enemies can't find, but with a lurking, eerie wind behind it, letting you know that this is a fleeting feeling, that you have to leave eventually. Another is the adaptation of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, which plays as a solution to a puzzle to open up some of the mansion's secrets. This moment is powerful, especially as Chris, since your big himbo hands can't play the piano, and you must recruit Rebecca to play the song, while she's figuring out how to play it on a surprisingly in-tune piano considering the state of the place. You leave and hear it echoing through the mansion, with a relaxing melody almost perverted by how it reverberates through the halls and lets low notes hang as the higher ones continue to ring in succession. Reminds you how alone you are in this huge, terrifying mansion, with few people to help and many more to face off against. Part 2. The first playthrough. Yeah, I took way too long to get to the actual game part of the video game I'm talking about, but the tone is probably the largest part of good horror media, if you ask me. All of that legwork and the graphics, sound, and writing is done in service of the primary gameplay loop, cobbling together limited resources to survive excursions further and further within the mansion and its surrounding areas, finding new supplies, puzzles, and puzzle pieces along the way. While doing this, you face enemies in hallways that you must dodge or dispose of, and thanks to the aforementioned tone, this is constantly tense, wondering if there's a zombie around the corner, or ammo, or healing items, or a key allowing passage to new areas. You play as one of 2 playable characters. That sounds redundant, doesn't it? The Beefcake, Chris Redfield, or the Master of Unlocking, Jill Valentine. The major beats of the story and the game itself play similarly, but there are enough changes in both to merit a second playthrough. Chris can take more hits than Jill, but she has 8 inventory spaces compared to his 6, so she can carry an extra healing item or 2, and has lockpick so she does not need to collect old keys, which saves space and allows for more freedom in moving around. She also gains a grenade launcher which can one-shot many enemies and is helped through the game by Daddy Barry Burton, who provides support in the emotional and zombie killing varieties. Chris is no slouch though. He carries a lighter at all times, which is used for some puzzles and burning zombies, finds more shotgun shells instead of the grenade launcher and grenades, and is helped by Rebecca, the sweetest bean, who can heal you for free in some circumstances. I ended up playing as Jill for my first playthrough and Chris for my second, and would suggest doing the same to other first-timers, as Jill's extra inventory space forces less reliance on the item boxes and safe rooms and less backtracking while you're still getting your bearings. The 2 most dated aspects of the game, according to some, are generally the fixed camera angles and the tank controls. Personally, I don't mind either at all, even as someone very used to behind-the-back first and third-person games with free camera movement, even though yes, I do sound like a tool for defending both. As I mentioned before, the fixed camera allowed for higher graphical fidelity of the pre-rendered backgrounds back in the original release, and I'm sure it looks much better than the jaggy 3D models you see in a lot of other games at the same time. In gameplay though, it feels like you are being watched from closed-circuit TV security footage, impacting the feeling on the player that you are always being watched, not in control of what you can see. For those who don't like tank controls, I get you. The modern remaster does introduce true analog controls, something much more like modern third-person games where you point the stick in the direction you want your character to go. I ended up playing my Jill playthrough with the classic tank controls and Chris's with the more modern analog controls. And I found myself enjoying the tank controls better. Not only does it make your controls feel a little more deliberate and better match the general game feel to the tone, but it was obvious that the rooms and the camera angle were designed with this in mind. When the camera switches angles, the original controls maintain your direction and momentum since you are still moving forward by pressing up on the controller, while the updated controls don't conserve this, often causing you to turn back around into the previous screen while entering a new one. But hey, how you play the game is ultimately up to you. Don't let some purist gatekeeper tell you what to do. Just enjoy the game, I guess. Whichever way you control, you explore the mansion while dodging its dreary denizens. Your primary obstacles are locked doors and the infected, mostly previously human zombies and post-dog Kerberos in the beginning of the game. These enemies are very resistant to gunshots from your starter pistol, and your knife, well at least for me, was completely mostly useless. Your ammo is fairly limited, so you're encouraged to be efficient and avoid enemies whenever possible, be it by juking them, which is hard to learn, choosing a different route, waiting for the right moment after they lunge, or knocking them down with a few shots or a defensive weapon. Speaking of which, the defensive weapons are items that are equipped and allow you to break out of grabs and damage zombies. They are one-time use, as I sure wouldn't want to grab a dagger from a zombie's neck even if it isn't moving. These allow for extra ways to bypass enemies in both lethal and non-lethal ways, as you will always be glad to find extras since they don't take up inventory space, encouraging further exploration even if your pockets are mostly full. These work well offensively to save ammo too, since a stab or shock makes them vulnerable and knocks your foes to the ground, and the flash grenades Chris gets can be shot once you shove them down a zombie's neck to blow their heads off. And blowing heads off is something you're going to want to do, like much zombie media that I'm aware of. Not only does it kill them with less ammo if you pull it off correctly, it also prevents what is probably the scariest thing in the game, Crimson Heads. When you kill zombies, you first may notice many of them do not despawn. Their bodies are on the floor, but they don't move. That is, until some time passes and they change drastically, while your generic zombies are slow, lumbering, and more situationally threatening than downright scary. The Red Skulls are fast, violent, and quite terrifying just from the noises they make. Your first encounter with them may be in an area once thought safe, when you hear some unfamiliar sounds, followed by scratching. Then, a previously normal for a zombie at least thing, with long, menacing claws will bolt at you and swipe with incredible speed. Unlike the dogs or traditional zombies, these are more easily able to stun lock you in a cycle of pain, and, while not particularly hardy themselves, are hard to stun while they quickly close the distance between them and you. You can kill them, in particular Jill's grenade launcher can make quick work of the beasties, but you do need good aim, some distance, and the ability to get the drop on them, which is hard to do with a fixed camera. This leaves you with a few choices to get past them. Drain your resources further and kill them, avoid them with good routing since you can't outrun them, or don't let them spawn in the first place. As I mentioned before, these only spawn from downed zombies with their heads still intact. Of course, they won't become the undead version of the already undead if you don't kill them. This brilliantly enforces the game's mentality of conserving your supplies and planning your excursions, since killing a zombie not only uses ammo, but if you need to return to the area where you downed one, it may become a Crimson Head, necessitating further use of your already limited resources. Secondly, you can burn the bodies with kerosene, which you can find in some safe areas. You can't always rely on this, however, since not only does a gas flask and, for Jill, the lighter take up valuable inventory space, but your kerosene is very limited, to where I want to say you only have enough for maybe 20 or so zombies in the game. In that case, it's only really best to use this in areas that you know you're going to frequently, like the areas immediately around safe rooms or popular hallways. Lastly, as I've alluded to before, the most efficient way to ensure both zombies and Crimson Heads don't bother you, very simply of course, blow off their heads. When aiming your weapon, you can point it up or down before shooting to attempt to critically hit their head, but even then, your beginning handgun only has a small chance of doing this, around 10% of the time or so, pushing into a more passive playstyle early on. The weapons you get later in the game have a much better chance of getting headshots, really cementing the feeling of growth as you learn to deal with the zombie menace, even in the midst of fighting increasingly dangerous and bizarre enemies. As you explore the mansion, you begin to unravel its mysteries. The puzzle box analogy you probably heard referring to the game works well since you spend most of the time exploring until you find a new item, then using this to go back and solve whatever you missed to unlock more items to explore, items, puzzles, and lore. Thankfully, the in-game map does a fantastic job of showing you which rooms still have items left or puzzle solving to do, and which doors are open or not. If not for this, I'm sure I would have been a bit more lost. It does not show what locks the doors have, however, so you need to keep a mental note of what keys go where. Thankfully, when you are done with an item, the game will tell you so and let you permanently discard it. In this way, I'm reminded of exploration in games like Metroid and Dungeons and Zelda, with a focus on discovering a treacherous area and backtracking, but I'm also reminded of point-and-click adventures, with using one item to unlock an area with more items and so on. The difference being you are less equipped to deal with the environment than Link or Samus, and in a place, well, I was going to say less dangerous than Daventry, but upon thinking about it, I guess it's dangerous in a completely different way. Between each room is, well, other rooms and hallways, as well as undead inhabitants, forcing you to think, plan, and rat out where you're going to go before you do. Lest you end up in a hallway, you left 4 zombies in, a pack of dogs, or, God forbid, a Crimson Head or 2. You quickly learn which rooms and halls you'll frequent and become more intimate with your surroundings, only for the rug to be pulled back from under you, luckily not literally, with a few spare new zombie spawns, and the introduction of a new enemy on your return to the mansion, the actual lizard people, the Hunters. You are communicated to early on what you need to be looking for throughout the game. One of the first things you see sets the scene. An anonymous door behind the foyer stairs covered in blood with 2 openings and screaming. Soon after, you find an eerie crypt with 4 stone heads, each with different indentations. Since this is a video game, you know these are problems you'll have to solve eventually, and you do spend the first third or so of the game looking for the masks for the heads, and the door with the screaming opens a path to the last area in the game. The way forward is not explicitly linear, which is further supported by obtaining not specific keys for specific doors, but keys with an emblem that unlocks a handful of doors, which you are encouraged to choose which way to go. While there is certainly a fastest way to finish the game, there is no wrong way. Worst case scenario, you hit a dead end and come back later and maybe dodge around a few zombies. All while you do this, you read notes and discover the history of the mansion and surrounding area, its former residents, and the shadowy organizations that loom over seemingly everything. I want to discuss this for a bit, so skip to time, here, click time, if you'd rather experience it for yourself. Part 3 of the story and my shitty analysis. Upon entering the medical safe room, it is noted that there is a large amount of medicine and drugs, some of the uncommon and old variety, all of which connected by being from the Umbrella Pharmaceutical Company. Later on, you find crests and keys bearing the Spencer family crest, and it is revealed that the manor belongs to the Earl Spencer, the CEO of Umbrella Corporation. The mansion's bizarre layout, hidden passageways, and later revealed underground labs was for the purpose of the company and Spencer, who recruited architect George Trevor to design and oversee construction of the manor. Many of the dead are former Umbrella employees, scientists, and security guards who carried out secret and illegal experiments throughout the mansion. One such experimental result is the moaning, violent creature that you see throughout the game that can't be hurt, who is revealed to be Lisa Trevor, George Trevor's daughter. Near the end of construction, George suspected he would be taken care of by Spencer for knowing too much about what is happening down there, and he hides, but is unable to make it out. Meanwhile, his wife and daughter were abducted for use in experiments. The mother died soon after as a result, but Lisa lived much longer, being experimented on for 20 years before a parasite mutated her to regain some semblance of intelligence. She was eventually deemed too dangerous and relocated to a cabin in the woods surrounding the mansion, forever searching for her mother, and is only reunited with her, well, her skull to be precise, when you open her casket during her boss fight. What she was experimented on was a progenitor virus, which was used by Umbrella in an attempt to develop bioweapons. This virus and its descendants are what were used to infect and mutate the plants and animals throughout the mansion for experiments, and a strain of the T virus, descended from the progenitor virus, developed to have a 100% lethality rate, leaks killing most of the people, turning them into zombies. Another strain of the T virus was made to make tyrants, undead beings with superhuman abilities, and you end up deleting the 30 years of research by blowing it to pieces with a rocket launcher. Good riddance. While trying to break your missing partner out of the underground lab and dispose of Umbrella's research, you find slides to look for a passcode. In these slides is a picture of the head lab members containing someone familiar, Albert Wesker, the leader of STARS, who you have seen throughout your time in the mansion warning you of a traitor, which turns out to be him, of course. A prodigy, he was recruited by Umbrella at a young age to work on the T-Virus project, later joining the army as part of the illegal bioweapons program, and then becoming head of STARS, your team in the police force, which was privately funded in large part by Umbrella. As part of the mission too, in the views of police and STARS, investigate the murders, he would lead Alpha Team to the mansion, obtain some samples, obtain combat data on the mutants using STARS, and destroy the laboratory and STARS to get rid of all the evidence. He even blackmailed Barry and threatened to kill his family to keep him on his side. Only he wasn't expecting the Tyrant experiments to be so successful, or STARS to be so competent, as he is cornered, releasing the Tyrant to kill STARS, but is killed instead. Or is he? I know there's lots of lore that is addressed later, but I'm going off of mainly what's in the text, so I'm not going to deal with this undead superpower Superman Wesker. In terms of my own personal read of the game, I see it as a pretty blatant critique of capitalism and its overpowering influence on government. The most obvious aspect is in the construction of Umbrella as a pretty typical evil corporation, in hiding its extra-legal human and weapon experiments behind its pharmaceutical-selling shell. Not that pharmaceutical companies aren't just evil in real life. I mean, look at that logo and tell me you don't see that impaling an unwilling body. In addition, Umbrella has been shown to wax its power in government in some pretty insidious ways, such as pushing people into government jobs and funding STARS itself to put people in charge of it, so that any investigations into their wrongdoing would go the way that they want. While I'm obviously not the most fond of cops in general as an institution, I hope I don't have to explain to you why police funded in part by a corporation liable to do some shady things is even more dangerous. And then there's a whole illegal bioweapons program funded in part by the government and Umbrella, something I'm not going to elaborate on too much more. Furthermore, there's a whole, zombie thing. Since the dawn of the living dead popularized the modern interpretation of zombies over 50 years ago, and probably before as well, zombies have been used as a metaphor for uncaring, blind conformity. This has continued in the decades following, with many artists around the world since using it for political and artistic expression. Examples include Fela Kuti's Zombie as a critique of the Nigerian government and army, and the film Shaun of the Dead using zombies as a parallel to those stuck in a rut and a repetitive society, among many, 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 many more. Zombies are slow, lumbering, clumsy, and not particularly intelligent in most interpretations, and thus are avoided easily individually. But large groups and swarms are much more terrifying and can often overpower an individual with sheer numbers and resilience. What is scary in the Spencer Mansion is not a singular zombie, but the seemingly unlimited amount in the residents' twisting halls and wondering what caused them. There are few survivors you meet in the game, The only person from Umbrella that you meet alive is Wesker, and he is putting on a multi-layered double-crossing masquerade. Thus, just as easily as Umbrella is able to convince and often indoctrinate its many scientists, just look at how young Wesker was recruited, and other personnel to create and guard these terrifying weapons of mass destruction, the T-Virus spreads amongst its ranks and turns everyone to a lifeless husk. And through contact, the virus eventually spreads outside of the mansion and its initial staff to surrounding areas, much as the company doctrine expands beyond its employees and shareholders to the general public into a cult of personality for some and blind brand loyalty to others. But of course, that's just my reading based on my views and the environment I am in at the moment, and maybe Capcom just wanted a haha zombies go The death of the author is a thing and whatnot, and I can take from it what I take from it. Part 4 or something or other, the replay. Now that that's out of the way, one thing I saw through others' enjoyment of Resident Evil as both a game and series is playing the game multiple times due to multiple modes, relatively short length of the experience when you know what you're doing. While you don't get a tofu or a hunk mode or A and B playthroughs like in Resident Evil 2 and its remake, you do get campaigns different enough to warrant at least a second playthrough, a time counter at the end, and unlockable outfits and bonuses if you want some spice in your just one or many more goes. The most dramatic thing about a second playthrough, though, isn't difference in core level design, as the mansion is still the same aside from character unique items and events. The biggest difference was inside of you all along, or rather, was building inside of you in your first playthrough in the game's design itself. You get familiar with the mansion and its puzzles and are a lot more experienced, so you'll be doing a lot less exploring and instead better routing so that you can see that the time at the end go down real quick. In my first playthrough, I was clumsy, slow, and scared, but in my second playthrough I was quick, confident, and adept. Now you know that going down this hallway this way will result in being attacked by dogs, so now you only go down it the other way. You know which areas you will frequent and thus need to prioritize killing zombies in. You know you need to bring the plant killer to a certain area so you don't have to backtrack to the item box when you show up empty-handed. I was able to bring my time down from 7.5 hours to 3.5, and that's still with having to figure out how things were different due to playing as Chris rather than Jill, like where the old keys were and dealing with smaller inventory space. And hell, maybe I'd like to get a sub 3-hour Jill run sometime to unlock the unlimited rocket launcher. The second playthrough really helps you feel like you've conquered your fears and challenges, and that your knowledge and experience truly is powerful, making for one of the most rewarding replays in recent memory, despite the game largely being the same. Conclusion. In conclusion, and well, here's my very controversial take, Resident Evil Remake is a very good game. Who would have thought a game of this stature actually being good? What? I would certainly recommend the game to anyone, even if you're a big baby like me who's overly anxious about horror and resource management. Finally, playing the game really helps contextualize the series' 25 years of existence and massive legacy and following. From what I can tell, this game and another personal favorite of mine, Sega's House of the Dead, led to a small zombie revival in the 90s, followed by a much bigger one in the aughts, and complete market saturation in the early 2010s. Though far from being the first zombie game, Resident Evil also attached the subgenre with video game, especially in late aughts, Call of Duty Zombies, Left 4 Dead, Dead Rising, Dead Island, and much more games with Dead in the title. Like seriously, way too many. Following The Walking Dead, and everyone getting sick of zombies for a bit, the genre's slowed down a bit, so I guess we have to thank Resident Evil for that, but also we can thank the game and its remake for the modern success of horror games. While certainly not the first horror game, one can't deny the success critically and financially of Resident Evil, and its influence on horror games from Silent Hill, to Fatal Frame, to The Last of Us, to even RPG Maker horror games. And yeah, despite all this legacy, the Resident Evil Remake stands on its own as a fantastic horror experience, and just game in general. I look forward to seeing what else the series has in store, and I'm sure I'll revisit the game in the future too. Thank you for watching my first published attempt. Plan on having something else out next month. Hopefully I make a regular thing of this since I enjoyed making it. It truly was a labor of love in many aspects, and I look forward to doing more. Feel free to subscribe and like this and share it around if you thought it was worth that. And follow me on Twitter. I'll paste that on the screen right here if you want other updates. And thank you again.